All right, so I think this is recording. Let's take a look at these two absolute value inequalities. Our first step in solving these is to get the absolute value by itself. Let's jump in and take a look at number 11. I've got two terms on the left-hand side. I want to add 4/5 to both sides of this inequality. So I have 35 divided by 6 times the absolute value. I'm going to write 1/3 of x as x over 3 plus 7/5. That's strictly less than this 271 over 30. And like I say, I'm adding 4/5 to each side. So since I'm adding these two fractions, I need a common denominator. I can see that 30 and 5, that I would need a common denominator of 30. So this one, 4/5, I multiply by the number 1. But I write 1 as 6 divided by 6. So here on the left-hand side, I'm not going to do anything with it yet. And on the right-hand side, I'm going to add these two fractions together because they have a common denominator of 30. So I've got 271 plus 24, and 271 plus 24 is 295. Is that divisible by 30? I don't know. It is not, but I can definitely reduce that fraction to 59 over 6. So on the left-hand side, I have 35 divided by 6 times this absolute value. And I'm going to reduce this fraction now just to make the number smaller, easier to work with, and write this as 59 divided by 6. So now to get the absolute value by itself, I'm going to multiply both sides of this inequality by the reciprocal of this positive fraction. The reciprocal of that is 6 over 35. And that's because now when you multiply reciprocals, these cancel and I just have 1. I don't have to change the direction of the inequality. If I multiply the left-hand side by 6 over 35, I need to multiply the right-hand side by that. So I can see that the 6 divided by 6 there cancels. Let's see what we have here. We have the absolute value of x plus 3 plus the 7/5 less than, and I don't believe that I can simplify the 59 divided by 35, but let's double check. No, I can't reduce that any further. So this is what I have here. Now, let me shrink this up. The arrow is pointing towards the absolute value, so I know that on my number line, it's the middle portion that's going to be shaded in my solution set. When the arrow is pointing towards there, we change the sign, make this negative 59 over 35, drop the absolute value symbols. All right, so with a variable only in the middle part, we don't have to separate this into two inequalities unless you just feel comfortable doing that. I'm going to subtract 7/5 everywhere. So here, with this fraction, if I subtract 7 over 5, I want a common denominator. So I'm going to multiply this guy by 7 divided by 7. That's 1, but 5 times 7 is 35, and that gets me a common denominator. When I subtract 7/5 in the middle term, those cancel. And over here, when I subtract that 7/5, again, I'm going to multiply by the number 1, but I'm going to pick 7 over 7, so that way I have a common denominator. As I get older, I seem to write bigger and bigger. All right, let's see if we can't simplify this. On the left-hand side, we have a common denominator of 35. And we have negative 59 minus, well, 7 times 7 is 49. So we've got negative 59 minus 49, and I get negative 108. That is less than x over 3, which is less than 59 minus 49 is 10. Oops. Yeah, 35. All right, so to get the x by itself, I'm going to multiply all three portions of this by 3. So when I take negative 108 times 3, I get negative 324. That's being divided by 35. When I multiply by 3 here, that 3 cancels. And when I multiply this by 3, I get 30 over 35. So let's simplify these fractions and then write our final answer in interval notation, and we'll be done. All right, so if I look at negative 324 divided by 35, I don't know if I can reduce that. I wonder if I've made a mistake. I'll have to check this against my key. I don't remember this crazy of an answer, but with all the fractions there, and I could have made a silly arithmetic error. This one clearly is divisible by 5, so I've got 6 over 7. I'm not sure how to pause this. Let's see. Yeah. It doesn't like that. Oh well. Yeah, okay, that's agreeing with my key, so I didn't make a silly mistake. Glad I didn't stop the video. Sometimes I make a mistake and I just feel more comfortable starting over. But that's what my solution, I forgot that I had my solution key up here. All right, so let's come on here to number 12 and see if we can get the correct answer here. I need to isolate this absolute value. So I've got 8/3 times this absolute value. We're going to subtract 27 over 8 from each side. Let's see, does 120 divided by 8 is 15. So when I subtract 27 over 8, I can easily get a common denominator by multiplying this by the number 1, but writing the number 1 as 15 over 15. All right, so let's see what we get here. I'm not going to do anything on the left yet. I just copy this down as it is. And this subtraction, I can write this now as a single fraction. If I take this 1,141 and subtract 27 times 15. If I do that, I get 736. 736 divided by 120, that fraction is going to reduce. I'm going to reduce it now and get 92 over 15. So I'm going to write this as 92 over 15. So now to get the absolute value by itself, I'm going to multiply both sides by the reciprocal of this coefficient. The reciprocal of 8 over 3 is 3 over 8. Since it's a positive value, I don't have to change the direction of the inequality of the arrow. And so here, these cancel, and I've got my absolute value now by itself. And on the right-hand side, we can simplify this new fraction because what? Let's take 92 times 3, that's 276. And if we divide that by 15 times 8, and if I use my calculator to reduce that fraction for me, I get 23 over 10. Double check it and see if you get the same. Now, since the arrow is pointing away from the absolute value, I come over here, I drop the absolute value symbols. I've got negative 8x over 5 minus 3 halves. Change the direction of the arrow and change the sign, this negative 23 over 10. Or I simply drop the absolute value symbols. When I shade my solution set, it's going to be away from the middle in the tail region. So we need to work towards that and see if that's the case. Let's shrink this up a little bit, give myself some room. All right, so here in this inequality, let's solve it first. Let's add 3 halves to each side. So we've got negative 8x over 5 is less than, if we take negative 23 over 10, but we're adding 3 over 2, we need to get a common denominator. So we need to multiply this 3 halves by the number 1, but right 1 is 5 over 5. So on the left, I have negative 8x over 5. And on the right, I have a common denominator 10. And negative 23 plus 15 is a negative 8. If I reduce that fraction, I've got negative 8 over 8x, negative 8x over 5 less than negative 4 over 5. If I multiply both sides of this equation by 5, those denominators cancel. And what do I get? I get negative 8. Negative 8x is less than negative 4. If I divide both sides by a negative 8, I have to change the direction of the arrow, and negative 4 divided by negative 8 reduces to 1/2. All right, so let's come over and solve this second part of this compounding inequality. Very similar to the other one. We're going to add 3 halves to each side, so 23 over 10. When we add 3 halves, we need a common denominator. We're going to make that denominator be 10. So we're going to multiply 3 halves times the number 1, but right 1 is 5 over 5. So now on the left, we have this fraction, but on the right, we now have this fraction over 10, and 23 plus 15, I believe, is 38. But 38 over 10 reduces to 19 over 5, doesn't it? I hope. Multiply both sides of this by positive 5. The arrow doesn't change directions, but it does cancel each of these denominators. When I divide by a negative 8, it will change the direction of this inequality, and I have this fraction, negative 19 over 8. So let's shrink this up. Let's draw a picture of that of our solution set on the number line, and then write our final answer in interval notation. All right, so, and then we'll check my key to make sure that I haven't made some silly arithmetic error, and it's possible. So this negative 19 over divided by 8 is to the left of 1/2. When I look to the original inequality, it's a strict inequality, so I'm not going to include my endpoints. And the arrow was pointing away from the absolute value, so I know I'm not going to shade the middle portion. It's going to be out in the tails. X greater than 1/2, strictly greater than 1/2 is shaded here to the right. And X strictly less than negative 19 over 8 is shaded here to the left. So if we write our interval notation, negative infinity, comma, negative 19 over 8, union 1/2, and positive infinity. So, hey, those are the two solutions that I'm getting for this one. Let's double check because I remember I have my answer key up. Yeah, and that agrees with my answer key. So, hey, that's kind of nice. I thought for sure I had made some silly arithmetic errors along the way, because I often do. If you try to write neat and organized and don't skip any steps, you're more likely not to have silly mistakes. If you do show your work, you'll get partial credit, most of the credit, if you have the concepts correct, but you just made a silly arithmetic error where it's clear that 9 out of 10 times you would get the problem correct. I'm going to give you most of the points. So, hey, I hope that helps, and I will talk to you later. Bye.